I say when you're just starting out, your personal values are really going to help dictate where your brand values are eventually going to go. The organization, the culture, like what you're trying to build.
Hey everyone, it's Jenn Foster here with Elite Expert Insider. We are really excited today to be talking about personal values and brand values. We have an awesome founder today of Jim Mark and Creative is actually what it's called. And Zach Colman is here. He's going to be talking about how we can have use our personal values as our brand values. And he has a podcast called Jim Cast, which features interviews with athletes and athletic driven leadership, discusses hot topics in sports and athletics. Welcome, Zach.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on the cast. I'm really excited.
Great. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got started in branding.
Oh man, if we had 10 hours, I could go into the complete story of my life, but I would say, it all really started back in college. I think very similar to business development and growth. I think when we're all going through those college phases where what are we going to do with our life? And I just couldn't really figure out what I wanted to do. I was a very creative person, didn't realize I was more of a creative minded person, right? I went to NAU for a year for visual communications. Didn't like the program up there at all. It was too artsy for me. Then ended up moving to Phoenix. Thought I wanted to do video game design and ended up realizing I didn't want to be my age now and be making video games. I'm glad I didn't because I can't even play them anymore. And finally went to ASU and said, you know what? I don't know what I want to be. Don't overthink it. Just go back into the visual communication field. So I did. And I ended up loving the program there more basis around the foundations and the fundamentals of design and creative and the science behind all of that. My wife actually still has a little bit of a pet peeve because she always looks at my degree and it says science. I got a bachelor's of science instead of bachelor's of arts in visual communications. And she always still makes fun of me for that. But, I kind of just found this fascination. My dad was a retired NFL player. He was a kicker. I grew up wanting to be just like him, realized I had to take my own path. And when I found the visual communication field, I just really realized that how fascinating it was to be able to help people develop their own brand, be seen, help them be heard and seen through the aspects of visual communications.
Mhm.
And so that's really where I got my start in it. The program itself was very group and community oriented and less so computer oriented. And I think that's why I grew such a fascination with it. And then, got out of college, was just kind of at the time of the 2010 recession. So it was very hard for me to find a job. So I kind of job hopped a little bit over the first few years of my career, but ended up moving up quite fast, worked for the Phoenix Suns for about 2 years as a senior designer. And then I ended up moving over to Pearson education as an art director and really working through and found an even deeper understanding and ability to start managing a team and starting to educate.
Mhm.
I love, I realized at that time I educated, but it was during that time in around 2017 that I had something called the honeypot syndrome where I had a very, very good boss, an okay medium boss, and then I had a boss I just didn't like. And it kind of put me in this realm of realizing that like we can have our dream, having a dream job and having a dream career are kind of two different things. I found my dream career, but having a dream job really came down to the values and the motivation I had towards helping a certain organization. And just having those three different bosses made me realize, you know, it's like needle in a haystack. So I realized I could do it better my own. And in 2017, I ended up going out on my own after, I got accepted to do basically an internship, a contract job that paid pretty much double in 6 months what I was making in a year at Pearson out in New York. Always my dream place to work, to do American Express's new website. I ended up turning it down because of the fear of going out on my own, and next day I regretted it, asked for it again, and they told me they already gave it to somebody else. But that was my deciding factor of, you know what, this happened for a reason. I need to go out on my own. And so I was smart about it. I gave it about 6 months and said, hey, in this next 6 months, I'm going to plan my exit to just finally go out on my own. Took me about 7 with a little bit of resistance, but I finally went out on my own, and I've been running my own business since 2017 since then.
Awesome.
Um,
And what is your main focus? Is it more brand or is it more values? Like, how do you distinguish the difference between your brand and values?
I feel like those are, in reality, I'd say they're the same thing. But for the case of depending on where you're at in your business growth and your business level, your business growth cycle, I'd say, you kind of have to look at it from a perspective of different things. And so, you know, I say when you're just starting out, your personal values are really going to help dictate where your brand values are eventually going to go. The organization, the culture, like what you're trying to build. You are really at the end of the day the deciding factor of where you're going to go. And that usually comes down to the behaviors that are associated with those values. You have to be seen yourself the way you want other people to be seen, how you want to be seen by the world. And so I would say personal values and brand values are realistically the same thing. It's just taking those personal values and it's eventually how do you, in short, systematize those values to your team and your audience.
So how do you separate or do you keep them together, your business brand and your personal brand? Because I feel like there's always this like fight. It's like, should I be talking more about my personal stuff or should we talk more about my business stuff on like social media or on our YouTube channel?
Don't get me wrong. When I'm talking about values, it's not exactly what message you're spreading. So if you're talking about, hey, I want to go out there and I want to, and I mean, I still have this sometimes. Like, does it really make sense as a business to talk about, let's say, what I ate this morning? Like, who's going to buy for me? you know? But you could also look at it in the way of nurturing and building relationships, and which is branding in a nutshell, right? So when you look at the value side of the situation, it's really you just guiding yourself to the evolution of how you want your business to grow. I think that in society as business owners, we have so much people out there saying certain things that it makes us and a little bit about and I've gone through this myself, and that's why I know that it's a common thing that a lot of people don't talk about, which is we end up growing a business and we get to a certain stage and we're burnt out and we're like, "Wait, how did my business grow this way? I didn't even want it this way. Like, this is like, how did this happen?" And then you realize it's because you're listening to everyone else instead of going off of what you want in your life, what you want in your personal life, and what you want in your business life. There's definitely a balance that needs to be emphasized there. And so, brand values in itself really are kind of the ecosystem of, how do you have your message? How do you have your story? How do you have all that stuff? Your personal story should be part of that. Yes, because you're the owner of the company. You're the CEO and or the founder, right? So it should be part of that message. Do you need to talk to them about every little small thing in your life? No, I'm not going to tell everyone about my kid being sick last week or something like that. But I will have the ethos of my values and the things I care about. For example, I'm very big into working out, running, mental health really is really what it comes down to. And I lost that when I was growing my business. I lost my personal value. I was burnt out. I didn't understand why. A lot of it was because I had 3 kids and I was like, I need to, make more money, blah, blah, blah. And that ended up causing me burnout. And so I had to take a step back and refine my personal values so that I can then contribute them to the growth I wanted for the business. And so now that value has turned into the one of my values of connection. I'm very big on connecting with myself, going out, and doing athletics is a way for me to connect with myself, work on my mental space, work on my visionary time. And so I was like, aha. And so now I take that pillar of connection and I turned it into that personal value and I turned it into a brand value for my team on new hires on the way I message my audience. And so I make sure that that value is contributed here because I also value it here. And if I'm not happy, then why would I even have a
Right.
business?
That makes sense. So how would you define if you have your main brand, right? And then you get a lot of people, I get a lot of people that are saying, "Oh, you should rebrand or you need to do a new logo." How often should you do that or should you not do that? I mean, when you look at McDonald's or FedEx, like they've had the same logo for 50 years, right? So, or however long they've been in business. So, what would you say advice to a company who's saying, "I want to rebrand or I need a new logo," but they've been in business for over 10 years?
First, to do that, I think you have to understand the emphasis of certain stages of business cycles. There's different types of business cycles, and branding plays a huge part of that. I actually did a podcast myself yesterday, and I talked a lot about, and it was one of those epiphany moments for me when I talked about the personal valley of death and how it correlates with the business valley of death. And there's this emphasis on one redoing a logo is not a rebrand. The tangibles, the graphics. I'm a visual communicator. We create great graphics for people, but the only way we can create great graphics is if we have a clear understanding and emphasis on what the person's values are. If that person doesn't have values and live by those values, then there's going to be no ethos. And the reason I come up with that, and I say that, is because valley of death periods happen different in a lot of businesses, different periods, depending on what type of business you have. But I would say, yeah, if you're just starting out, creating a rough logo yourself or something just to like start out, I think is totally fine. I don't think you need a huge brand language, a huge branding package, all that, all the fancy stuff. Going through a rebrand isn't necessarily what people think. When people see, we'll say McDonald's, we'll just use the Walmart one for instance. The Walmart just rebranded again, right? And a lot of designers in particular will look at it and say they didn't really change much. They just moved this here to here and they paid $100,000. I'm like, listen, just because the graphics don't change 100% doesn't mean that they didn't go through an extensive internal rebrand differentiation. It's the internal ethos as much as the external ethos and the external messaging. So when do you rebrand? I would say if you are at a point in your business where you are feeling like you're stuck, your team isn't aligned, you're not aligned with your vision, you have clients that you're like, hey, like these aren't my clients, these are my clients, or you have 2 good clients and 80 bad clients, and you're like, we want more of these clients, then yes, that's when you need to take a shift and say, well, how do I, as a person, allow myself to one become more that way if that's what you value. Yeah, I mean, if you value those clients, you probably have similar values as them. So how do I bring those values in and how do I dictate those behaviors amongst my team? The branding process in itself should be really is kind of the brand is the process
Mhm.
itself. I don't know if that really makes sense, but the process itself is what
Yeah,
dictates
it does.
that growth, right? And that change and that environment shift. And so that's would be a good correlation for you depending on where you're at. From a demo perspective, I would say I usually see rebranding and shifting usually around the marks of like 250 to 500 a year is usually a good spot. 1,000,000 is a huge spot. Probably see it again in about 10,000,000 where they do a rebrand where they shift and they start to say, "Hey, this has gotten a little out of control here. Like, how do we start fixing and pivoting our direction towards either a higher audience or more aligned team members?"
So if you had a new client come to you, what would be the first step that you do with them? Is it values or what is the first step you go through or the first things you pull out of them?
Yeah, our biggest emphasis is we help develop brands that help develop people. Like that's my jam. That's what I love. It's hard to spread a message or help somebody spread a message, either it be visual or written, whatever it may be, if the client has no idea what their message is, or they fall into the trap of thinking it's just a logo and it's just some written words that we wrote down because that's what we were supposed to do, and they're not living by them. Because how are you supposed to showcase the brand authentically if that's the case? And so we always want to sit down and go through a brand strategy sessions. If that's either a keynote with the team to kind of develop these values, but we like to go through and develop the messaging, the vision, and all that, or recalculate it or reposition it first and foremost. Then the graphics and the language fall into place. Values will dictate the emotional impact of the colors you use, the fonts you use, the language that you develop, the messaging, all that fun stuff. And so that's usually kind of the roadmap on how it starts. So step one is usually really just brand development type package. Two would be going down to the website side of things. Like, all right, now let's look at how the website is affecting that audience, affecting the user, and all that fun stuff. And so then we'll go in and we'll develop all that. We'll go in and say, hey, what's your audience? How are you positioning yourself on the web? Where is your audience? Is the web really a place where you're even getting your audience? Right? So is you can dictate your online presence based off of that and how that's going to look and how that's going to feel operations wise too. How is the team going to come in and work on that website if we're not going to? Like, we have to align the people to it, right? So that would be step two. And then step three would then come the marketing strategy. Marketing strategy shouldn't come in until you have your values and your vision down, because how many times do you hear people say, oh, well, I learned that, hey, I need to do Facebook ads to get clients, and digital marketers especially say, oh, you just need to be everywhere. Just do this. No, you don't. You find one or two good things. Most of the time, it's one good offline and one good online. And it's like, don't get marketing fatigue. Let's just sit down and say, really hone in on where your audience is. And we just figure that out through the branding. So now it's going to be much easier to define a marketing strategy to say, hey, we need to do this and we need to do that. I think the golden nugget here for everyone to understand, especially in our high, I'm a very grit and perseverance type guy, right? I don't believe in hustle culture. I think work smart, not hard. That if they think going through the process, figuring out the vision, figuring all that stuff is a waste of time. What am I paying for? I don't have a tangible result. Funny enough, they just realize, hey, if you go through this stuff, that's strategy. Strategy in itself is an accomplishment of a high achiever. That's what leaders do. Their main goal is, in a nutshell, strategy. So
Mhm.
if you're able to sit down for even 2 days, figure out your vision and your mission, figure out this stuff, the rest of the stuff is probably going to be dictated and created in 1/3 the time that it would have if you did not. So you're actually saving money, not just in the short term, but long term. Now you know the types of people to hire. Now you know the types of people to put in the right seats. Now your messaging is clear. And
Mhm.
so I would say to anyone, like I said, I think the golden nugget is really to just start to weave your mind in less so of an operational type mindset and more of, if you're an entrepreneur, your main goal is eventually going to be a visionary, is going to be a leader of your company. And so start to train your brain to know that those smaller, impactful moments are actually going to move the needle more than, oh, I need a new logo because people said I needed a new logo.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Zach. This has been really good. Lots of information about how we can align our personal brand with our business brand. Tell us where people can go to find you, and tell them a little bit about your podcast and your TED Talk.
Yeah. So I recently did release a TEDx. I'll give it to you. You can put it down in the show notes. It's actually on how branding helps develop you. So it goes very correlation with a lot of what we talked about today. I go into my 3 pillars of how I refound my values and refound my core pillars, my 3 C's of branding for individuals and for leadership roles. And so go in and watch that. If anyone wants to, find me, yeah, you head over to my podcast. I'll give you our newsletter link. You can sign up to our podcast. We just actually shifted the branding of our podcast. So it is now the Fit to Grit cast. And so I'll send you a link down for that below, and you can throw that in the show notes as well.
Awesome. I like that name. Fit to Grit. I like that. Well, thanks for being on this show today, Zach. We'll put those links up in the show notes so people can go there to find you. This has been the Elite Expert Insider Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and share this podcast with someone who you know it would benefit. Hope you guys have a great day.
Hey, are you looking to increase your revenue, build credibility, and elevate your brand? This podcast is brought to you by Elite Online Publishing, an innovative publishing and full spectrum marketing company. They will publish and market your book to make it a #1 bestseller. Becoming an author is the best way to market your business. So contact them at eliteonlinepublishing.com today. All of their authors become #1 bestsellers.